They're worth over $5 billion as the co-founders of one of the world's most prominent crypto exchanges. Their insane journey began at Harvard, where they had a $centbillion idea for a social network stolen from them by Mark Zuckerberg. How in the world do two twin Olympic rowers find themselves in a position to build a multi-billion-dollar empire in crypto from the ashes of the shame and humiliation of what happened with the origin story of Facebook? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the Winklevoss twins. My name is Henok, and this is Pantheons podcast, a business education podcast where you and I get together to extract the principles and the lessons from the greats. We call them Pantheons, and the goal is to study their stories and use their principles, use their struggles, use the mistakes and the wins and successes in your own work. Charlie Munger once said that learning from history is a form of leverage, and he is right. When you study the greats, you become great, which is why Pantheons is a study of other pantheons. Now, I'm going to share quotes and highlights that I found interesting or valuable for your work. And my primary source material for this particular episode is a book entitled Bitcoin Billionaires. I've put in dozens of hours in prep for this specific episode's meticulous study of the book, articles, interviews, podcast transcripts, and much more so that we can give you the highest value per minute as you consume this episode. Thank you so much for subscribing across all platforms. Let's dive into the story of the Winklevoss twins. Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss at a young age moved between New York, California, and Connecticut. They grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and their father, Howard, started a tech company, and the biography talks about how after school they would spend a lot of time with their father in the workplace. Here's a quote. They would talk with other software engineers. They would read the computer magazines lying around and play on the computers and watch from the inside how a tech company worked. So these guys were, the way I would say it is, they were baptized in tech startup world. It was in their blood. It's in their DNA. They were not simply jocks, right? Howard, here's another quote. Howard, their father, enjoyed talking about the things that he was passionate about. Things like business, technology, computers, math, financial markets. And Cameron and Tyler's models growing up were not sports figures. They were startup founders like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. So growing up in this household, they learned Latin. They learned to code in computer languages like HTML. Contrary to popular belief or expectations or assumptions when it comes to the Winklevoss twins, at 13 years old, they actually had a website business where they would build websites for other people and make money. Entrepreneurs as teenagers as well. And then the last part of the quote we just read, right? They were studying startup founders like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I'm telling you, this is a principle that we see across all of our pantheons. Pantheons study other pantheons. So growing up, they had money. Their household was definitely a home of affluence, upper middle class, however way you want to describe that. But it wasn't easy, right? So let me give you something that happened in their family that really was probably the highlight of their pain as well. They had an older sister named Amanda, and when the twins were in college at the age of 20, a year before they met Mark Zuckerberg and had the idea that inspired Facebook, she tragically died in 2002. Here's the quote. Amanda was a brilliant student, star athlete, charismatic actress with almost limitless energy, a rising star when she went off to Williams College. And suddenly, she started suffering from debilitating bouts of depression. The family was deeply concerned about her well-being, and they tried to figure out what was going on. It was a hellish 2-year journey into the world of mental health. They were suddenly in a land that science did not understand, where syncing up a diagnosis with the right treatment was like hitting a piñata blindfolded. It was also a deeply private struggle they faced. Almost no one outside of the family knew what was going on, and most wouldn't understand. This was not a broken arm and not something you could specifically point to and easily process. Now, I want to switch from a quote that came from the biography to Tyler Winklevoss's blog post. Here's a quote from that blog. In 2000, Amanda began suffering from severe debilitating depression. This was not seasonal or transient. This is not the seasonal or transient kind. It was the clinical kind that hits like a freight train, the kind that totally alters and changes you into an unrecognizable shell of your former self. Like many struggling with a pain that thankfully most of us will never know, she sought relief through substances to help ease her pain. An eating disorder developed. She started cutting herself too. 2 years later, on the eve of June the 14th, 2002, her struggle came to an end for good. She collapsed on a street corner in New York City and would never get up again. She was only 23 years old. Amanda died of cardiac arrest caused by a drug overdose. Her beautiful heart had given out under the weight of it all. Let me give you a quote that came from the biography Bitcoin Billionaires on the other side of her death. The New York Post immediately ran several fabricated stories, thrusting the tragedy into the tabloid sphere. It was a cruel airing of a private struggle that mischaracterized their fight, and more important, who their daughter was. It had been a devastating time for the twins and their parents. Their parents rose in prominence. This is a family worth following and studying, according to how tabloids ran back then. This is also the early 2000s. Mental health wasn't viewed or treated the same back then as it is now. And what I want to highlight in this moment for the twins is they were no stranger to suffering. Let's talk about what they may be most known for, which is the founding story, the contentious founding story of Facebook and their time at Harvard. So the big idea is this, and this is from there. I'm gonna present the story as I've heard it, growing up, as I read it in this book, more of from the Winklevoss twins' side and their perspective. The Winklevoss twins and another partner hired an engineer to develop a social networking idea. They wanted to create a website where individuals in colleges and universities could connect together through social media, specifically college-aged individuals. You needed a .edu. You needed a email address connected to a university to access this website. So they decided to contract or bring in Mark Zuckerberg to create such a website. The story goes on that Mark took their idea and built a broader social network beyond just simply colleges, although he did start with universities and colleges, but what eventually became Facebook. So, as you can imagine, the twins, they raised hell, especially as the project continued to explode and go nuclear. They went to Harvard professors, the president himself. They went to the news outlet, the paper. They did everything they knew, and eventually it led to a lawsuit. Now, Zuckerberg resists the lawsuit initially, pretty hardcore, but eventually he decided to offer a settlement because Facebook was going to have an IPO at the time of this lawsuit. And the last thing that Zuckerberg needed was details and descriptions that were in his emails or his phone number to get leaked and publicized before the IPO. Many believed, and maybe he did as well, that it would cost the company tremendously if that information, the founding information of Facebook, were to be publicized. It wasn't. If you could actually go look and see some of the things that he allegedly said, and it's not pretty. So he offered them $65 million. So here's the quote in the book. Tyler simply couldn't just walk away, not even for $65 million in cash. "We will take it in stock," he suddenly said. And Cameron nodded. Their lawyer's face blanched. "Are you crazy? You want to invest in that puts?" And so they counteroffer the $65 million in cash from Zuckerberg's side of the table with $45 million in stock and about $20 million in cash. And the lawyers did not like this at all. The lawyers, the attorneys for the Winklevoss twins thought it was a dumb idea. They didn't want anything to do with the stocks. They were worried about the volatility of the stocks, that if they were to receive the stocks, the price could completely tank, thereby, losing a ton of value. They wanted cash, good old fashioned cash. Here's the quote. And here's what ended up happening. Really, they settled. So they settled for $45 million in cash, $45 million in stocks, Facebook stocks, and about $20 million in cash. They handed the cash over to the attorneys. So here's the quote. After Facebook's IPO, the twins' $45 million in shares soared. It appreciated 15 times and went on to be worth more than $500 million. If the attorneys had taken its fee in stocks, the firm would have ended up with upwards of $300 million for 6 months worth of work. Zuckerberg goes on to be the darling, the center of Silicon Valley. He was Time Magazine's Person of the Year at that time. Barack Obama, during his campaign, came and visited Facebook's headquarters and is doing an interview and creating content with him. Very infamous video you can watch on YouTube yourself. He is the center of the entrepreneurial world, living the entrepreneur's dream, starting out, in a dorm room and built this monster company that IPO'd to the tune of a multi-billion-dollar valuation. And while Zuckerberg's brand and Zuckerberg's story and lore is going thermonuclear, rising like the price of Bitcoin over the years. You have the Winklevoss twins' reputation and brand descending just as quickly, and they are painted as the villains. The movie The Social Network comes out and paints them as these dumb jocks who are money hungry, entitled, prideful, greedy, and Zuckerberg's almost like the anti-hero villain. So it's a very horrible turn of events, for the twins. And it's a beautiful turn of events for Mark. Here's a quote. It had never just been business between them and Zuckerberg. It had always been personal, and they had lost. If they wanted to change that narrative, they needed to go back to the arena where it all started and begin to fight all over again. What's next? And you got to put your shoes in the Winklevoss twins. They, years of struggle, not financial, like many people maybe in their past or currently are dealing with right now, but certainly psychological, emotional, relational. They are pariahs in society. They have this crazy movie that's painting a picture about them that they would say is untrue. And they find themselves at a rock bottom moment. And so they ask, you ask, what's next? What do you do from here? You're worth $500 million. Do you just sail off into the sunset? Where do you go from here? What did they do? In 2012, they launched a venture capital firm, Winklevoss Capital. And they ended up headquartering not in Silicon Valley, but in New York. Here's the quote. The twins never needed to work a day in their life, and yet they chose to work every day for their lives, for every day of their lives. Why? What made them tick? Complacency was just not in their blood. At their core, Tyler and Cameron were builders. As kids, they built Legos. As teenagers, they built websites. And in college, they built a social network. They were not on this earth to merely exist. They were here to create. It is just who they are. And I'll tell you, this is something we see across the board with Pantheons, right? I could point to Elon Musk, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie. I can point to even, in prior episodes, right? Episode 1, Brian Armstrong. Episode 2, CZ Binance. Episode 3, Vitalik Buterin. These people are still working. John D. Rockefeller is dead. Andrew Carnegie is dead. But these people were working long after they became millionaires and billionaires, showing us they were not merely driven by money, but also driven by mission. So the twins launched their venture capital firm. They're flush with cash. And, this is the early 2010s. Web 2 is going, ballistic. And people are looking for money to build new web apps and new websites and tech. And so, the Winklevoss twins have capital, and they're looking to, find a home for that capital. And yet, over and over and over again, they found themselves dealing with company startup founders who would show interest initially, and somehow, some way, the deal would fall apart. They would say things like, we are oversubscribed, we don't need your money anymore, something changed, excuse after excuse after excuse. Let me give you a quote from the book that highlights one of these interactions. This is what the founder was saying to the Winklevoss twins. Between you and me, I want to take your money. I just can't. We are oversubscribed. Guys, I gotta go. Cameron kept his voice calm. Come on, Jake, give us a minute. Oversubscribed? Our dollars are as green as anyone else's. So please tell us what's going on. We deserve that much. And the kid looked around again and then lowered himself back in his seat. He took a drink, rather a gulp, from his beer mug and then shrugged. You see where we are, right? Facebook's first headquarters, you could throw a hard drive from here and hit it. Their new headquarters is about 5 miles down that road. Those guys by the arcade machines in the corner over there, they're working on video compression. Their exit strategy, they've only got 6 weeks left of runway before their startup runs out of cash and runs off a cliff. They might want your cash. They might not have anything against you. In fact, they may really like you, but they don't want to cut off all the branches on their tree either. They have other investors too, as well as board members. You think the suits would let them take a penny from the 2 guys Mark Zuckerberg hates more than anyone else in the world? Your dollars might be green, but they are marked. The twins are alleging that at this moment, not only have they lost a $70 billion concept that ended up being a major company, Facebook, not only did they lose that to Zuckerberg, not only did they have to deal with movies and pop culture and society viewing them as a pariah, but now, even in the aftermath, as they find themselves at the absolute bottom, yes, flush with cash, but no success to show for any of it, they find themselves blackballed by Facebook. They find themselves blackballed by Mark Zuckerberg, allegedly. Here's the quote. Here's another quote following up. The kid stood up again, his eyes apologizing, and then reached into his pocket and took a crumpled $20 bill out of his pocket. This young entrepreneur chasing his dreams was afraid to be seen even letting the Winklevoss twins pay for his beer. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we find with the Winklevoss twins at the absolute rock bottom of their career, drowning in shame, drowning in humiliation, drowning in fake news, drowning in things that are just not true about them, and yet they can't deploy capital, and yet they can't move their venture capital firm forward, and yet they can't find new opportunities because everywhere they turn, they continue to run into obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. We saw this in episode 1 with Brian Armstrong, years of working on a startup and $0 to show for it in Buenos Aires before he finally moved to Silicon Valley, right? We saw this with CZ Binance, jumping around from job to job to job, looking for fulfillment, looking for satisfaction, looking for opportunity to make a ton of money, right? Before he ended up founding Binance. The rock bottom nature of our story is consistent across the stories of all the Pantheons, which is encouraging, super encouraging for me personally, I gotta say, because, maybe you find yourself in a moment where you're struggling. I know many a time I've found myself for years struggling, right? And to know that, okay, the bottom is not abnormal for Pantheons. It's actually a part of the process. I find it super encouraging. So that's where the twins find themselves, certainly not monetarily. I want to be clear about that. Many of us, our rock bottom moment maybe had something to do with finances. Not so much here with these guys. More like shame, humiliation, brand, credibility, just trying to build a business in this country. And there's no recourse for them, right? So the guys are partying. Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss find themselves in the Mediterranean partying. And they're at a great party. Celebrities are everywhere. They find themselves in. And they meet a guy. They meet a guy named David at one of these parties. David pitches this idea of Bitcoin to the Winklevoss twins. They're interested, so they ask, say we do want to get involved, Tyler said. What do we do? Buy up some of this Bitcoin? Here's David's response. You could, or you could go one step deeper. As I said, at the moment, Bitcoin is volatile. Buying some Bitcoin right now is sort of like gambling. And everyone knows you don't really get rich by being a gambler. You get really rich, David continued, by being the house. So they're intrigued. David follows up on Twitter after this crazy party, and the Winklevoss twins go on the hunt. Because again, they're hunting for opportunity. They're searching for any kind of opportunity. They'd never heard of Bitcoin. They'd never heard of blockchain technology being integrated with, currency or finances or funds. So they're interested. They're looking up articles, websites, blogs, Reddit, social media. They're scouring the web. They even reach out to professors, university, they went to Harvard, right? So you would think the best of the best in the world are right there, and they would know something about this thing called Bitcoin. They reach out, and these professors respond with, oh, it's a Ponzi scheme. There's no value, and there's no underlying value inside of it. It's going to zero. And, everyone's telling them this is trash, but online they're reading about this crazy community, this thing called Bitcoin. And this reminds me of a Warren Buffett quote. Here's what he said. I would say if Charlie and I have any advantage, it is not because we're so smart. It is because we're rational. We are very seldom, we very seldom let extraneous factors interfere with our thoughts. We don't let other people's opinion interfere. So the twins use their own independence, their own independent mindset, and they resisted what their professors and the establishment and the people they grew up with around them had to say, right? And they're not new to overcoming people standing in their way, right? Whether it's Harvard telling them that, their idea of a social network belongs to Mark and they should just, not fight it, stop resisting it, or whether it's the president of Harvard professors, Mark Zuckerberg and his lawyers themselves, whether it's the world telling them they're pariahs, they should just quit, give up, get underneath a rock, call it a day. These guys deal with people, they've dealt with people over the years, over and over, telling them no, standing in their way, obstacles and resistance. And it's no surprise or no wonder that in the face of all that opposition, they kept plowing forward. This is this reminds me of a Henry Ford quote when he was first creating his Model T. Here's what he says. Many supposedly wise people explained with particularity why the automobile could never be more than a toy. No man of money even thought of it as a commercial possibility. Imagine building the first car, the first mass use car, right? A company. And everyone's telling you, and I mean everyone, like no one had a conception that this could be a multi-billion-dollar empire that would last the century. No one saw it coming but Henry Ford. And no one saw, and very few people in the Winklevoss's world outside of David, who they just met, had any belief or faith in what Bitcoin can do, especially in the early 2010s, just after it first launched. So David sets up a meeting with individuals of a company, right? Because David's whole proposition is, listen, you can invest in Bitcoin, but just so you know, it's extremely volatile. But why don't you, instead of trying to gamble, why don't you invest in the house? Why don't you consider being the house is what, the quote, that's what he said, right? So that looks like being a part of the business of crypto. So David sets up a meeting with a company called BitInstant. So here are the players within BitInstant. Charlie Shrem, a character that we're going to talk a lot about this episode, is the CEO of BitInstant. Eric Voorhees is the director of marketing, and Roger Ver is one of the seed investors in the company BitInstant. Just so you get a taste of what Charlie is like, their very first meeting, Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss twins, their very first meeting with Charlie involved Charlie smoking weed. Eric and Roger basically didn't want Tyler or Cameron Winklevoss investing into this company because, and at this time, especially in the early days of crypto, it's certainly true now, but especially back then, Bitcoin was built on libertarian ideas of freedom, almost anarchy, pushing away from government oversight or control or the establishment and being rebels, being different, resisting the man, that type of ideology. And so Roger and Eric looked at the Winklevoss twins and like, these Harvard grads that came from money, like we don't want those guys involved in our business. So the twins, get pitched on BitInstant. They're hungry for money. They need money to grow, of course. And, Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, can't find a company to invest in with opportunity and upside. So here comes this Bitcoin company, related to an industry they never heard of before. And they're learning about this company. They're hearing the pitch and they're interested. So they go to their dad, they go to their father for advice. Here's the interaction. And here's what their father said. I think Bitcoin is worth a deeper dive, but BitInstant is a bigger question. This kid, Charlie, is going to be a handful. Someone needs to be actually in charge. Grab a hold of the reins and make sure this thing doesn't start to veer sideways. Right now, all of that falls on this Charlie kid, and that's who you'd really be investing in. Not the business plan or the philosophy, a kid running the show. And I love this next quote in the biography. Even their mathematical father had to agree. A second act with the enormous potential of Bitcoin seemed like it was worth the risk. It wasn't often you got a second chance to catch lightning in a bottle. So the big idea is the first time they ever caught lightning in a bottle was a company that, an idea that ended up becoming the Facebook, and Facebook is, a centubillion-dollar idea, right? And now they discover Bitcoin in its early days, lightning in a bottle, second time around in the same lifetime. I just find that to be so unbelievable. Most people are fortunate if they ever get $1 billion idea that they can execute upon that can lead to, realizing those dreams and vision. Winklevoss twins, got a second crack at it. So they invested in BitInstant, the company, $800,000 for 22% of the entire company. And they decided to go all in on Bitcoin as well. So they want to buy a lot of Bitcoin. Let me give you the quote. That very afternoon, they told Charlie they wanted him to buy more Bitcoin for them and that they were about to wire over $100,000 from Winklevoss Capital's bank account. The clients Charlie worked with daily, buying and selling Bitcoin, were usually spending a few $100s max. Sure, there was a few big players out there, but nothing near $100,000. But to Charlie's utter shock, that wire was only the beginning. The wires kept coming in. The twins wanted more Bitcoin, so much in fact that it eventually became obvious that they would need to go straight to the source, sidestepping Charlie and BitInstant. Ladies and gentlemen, the Winklevoss twins put up $11 million to buy about 1% of the entire Bitcoin supply. Unbelievable. And they did this in the early 2010s. Let's keep going. This actually reminds me of a Charlie Munger quote. Charlie says, the wise ones bet heavily when the world offers them that opportunity. They bet big when they have the odds, and the rest of the time, they don't. It's just that simple. So Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have an investment strategy that, it's very simple in my opinion, and it makes sense. Rule number one, you're not going to find or come up with thousands of incredible billion-dollar ideas. It's just not going to happen. That this lightning in a bottle moment, these few and far between opportunities come once in a while after a ton of work, a ton of research, and a ton of study. But when you find them, you've got to go heavy into them. That's their entire investing philosophy. Ton of research, ton of homework, keep your ear to the ground, stay in the industry, keep building, keep hunting. They are few and far between, but when you find those opportunities, go in and go heavy. Don't go light. The twins seem to be doing something very similar as it relates to Bitcoin. They spent that summer studying, researching online, social media, blogs, Reddit, reaching out to Harvard professors, and they came to a conclusion on their own. They made their own decision. They thought through how they were going to invest in Bitcoin, and they executed at the highest level, and they went in heavy. Now, at this time, Tyler and Cameron travel around the world. They want to sell Bitcoin to the masses. They began to evangelize, sitting down with banks, firms, CEOs, executives, individuals, investors as well, to try to push this idea of Bitcoin. And of course, the BitInstant company is interesting that they just invested in, because all it does is help people buy and sell Bitcoin. So if someone is interested in Bitcoin, then naturally they're going to need a website or a platform to help them acquire that Bitcoin. And so they're pushing their company. So if they could sell somebody on Bitcoin, it's very likely they could sell someone on using BitInstant as well. So the twins are setting up meeting after meeting after meeting with Charlie, the CEO of their newly invested company. And here's a great, this was actually a breakthrough moment after the Winklevoss twins came in. They set up Charlie and BitInstant with a company that could help them out with licensing and regulation and compliance. The twins put Charlie in front of a venture investment firm in New York and potential banking partners as well. And indeed, together they'd achieved some meaningful victories. Specifically, their meeting with OboPay had yielded an important partnership. OboPay, a licensed money transmitter, had agreed to essentially rent their licenses to BitInstant so it could transmit money in accordance with state money transition laws, which for the first time made Charlie's company legally compliant, something Charlie and his team had pretty much ignored up until this point. So the twins are serving up softballs, and Charlie is knocking it out of the park, meeting with companies, meeting with banking institutions, meeting with investors, and of course, OboPay, and winning opportunities, helping the company grow like crazy. And BitInstant did take off. So around this time, BitInstant took off, and they were processing millions of dollars per day in Bitcoin transactions, and 35% of all of Bitcoin's transactions across the world were going through the funnel of BitInstant. Unbelievable. Here's a quote. The demand for the service had been so intense that the few times he had to temporarily shut the site down for server upgrades and maintenance, the downtime had caused an uproar among his customers, and he received concerned emails from Tyler and Cameron. But Charlie had brushed it off. BitInstant had made him a celebrity in the Bitcoin world and a micro-celebrity in the outside world. And this was Charlie's moment, and he knew it. I gotta say, things are great. The Winklevoss twins rise out of the ashes. They find Bitcoin extremely early in the life cycle of Bitcoin. They invest heavily. They find this company, BitInstant, so much upside and opportunity, right connections, the right decisions are made, the right relationships are being formed and built on the back of the work of the Winklevoss twins, and they are soaring. A third of the entire Bitcoin industry is running through BitInstant. Charlie is becoming a celebrity, and success begins to spoil Charlie. Here's a quote. He'd packed his belongings, climbed out of his mom's basement, and made a break to the nightclub, moving in with his college friends to an apartment several of them shared that was literally above the club. Charlie lost focus, and now we begin to see a pattern of Charlie and his circle of friends within this company engage not in discipline, not in habits for success, but they began to engage in a pattern of drinking, drugs, sex, and partying. And it ruins this business. It begins to affect his lifestyle, his personal decisions begin to affect BitInstant and this business almost immediately. So let me just give you an example. So a quote I'm about to read is the aftermath of a meeting that the twins had with Charlie and another potential business. But Charlie had been drinking and partying the night before. Here's the interaction. Charlie, Cameron finally said, did you even sleep last night? You look like you've been on a 5-day bender. Do you know how hard it was to set this meeting? Tyler asked. John is one of the most powerful people in fintech. Before the meeting, from their email exchanges, it seemed like John and his partners really understood Bitcoin and were genuinely interested in hearing Charlie's pitch. But despite the warm audience, things had gone sideways from the moment Charlie had entered the room. Charlie had launched into his presentation like the Tasmanian devil. Tyler said, this can't happen again. Charlie stammered, was it really that bad? Worse. You weren't just unprepared. You looked like you were on coke, completely schizo. And that right there brings me to a quote from Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel. He said, success breeds complacency. Complacency breeds failure. Only the paranoid survive. So Tyler and Cameron get another once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with a very, very powerful, influential individual. His name is Matthew Mellon. This guy succeeded the previous owner of a bank that was founded in the 1800s, old money. And the twins sell him on the idea of Bitcoin. And we're trying to get a hold of Charlie to help this guy buy some Bitcoin through the exchange. Charlie with Roger Ver were partying in Panama. And I'll tell you, Roger Ver and the circle that's around BitInstant and Charlie is so bad, toxic, poison for the growth and the opportunity that they had at hand. They had a multi-billion-dollar idea and company at the tip of their fingers. And these guys are absolutely ruining and throwing away everything. And this is a lesson that we can all learn. You have got to choose your friends wisely. You have got to be a dictator and a Nazi about the people that you allow, the voices you allow in your ecosystem. You've got to keep Pantheons in your circle because you become like the people or the individuals that you're most influenced by, the people that you're around the most. Charlie Munger said this, I am a biography nut myself. And I think when you're trying to teach the great concepts that work, it helps to tie them into the lives and personalities of the people who develop them. I think that you learn economics better if you make Adam Smith your friend. That sounds funny, making friends among the imminent dead. But if you go through life making friends with the imminent dead who had the right ideas, I think it'll work better in your life and work better in education. It's way better than just giving the basic concepts. Charlie is justifying why he spends a lot of time consuming biographies. This is the late Charlie Munger. He's no longer with us, but he spent a considerable portion of his life reading. And a lot of his readings were studying people who were dead, people with great concepts and ideas, because Pantheons study other Pantheons. Pantheons hang out with other Pantheons. Pantheons in process hang out with other Pantheons that are in process. Rockefeller said this quote on the type of people to keep around you and to do business with. Perhaps it's worthwhile to emphasize again the fact that it's not merely capital and plants and the strictly material things which make up a business, but the character of the men behind these things, their personalities and their abilities. These are the essentials to be reckoned with. So essentially this idea that two different people, basically it's this idea that two different people can run the exact same business and have wildly different results. Charlie's character completely ruined this business. And Tyler and Cameron, they made a huge mistake investing in Charlie, right? We talked about earlier investing in BitInstant, but an investment in BitInstant is actually an investment in Charlie. So here's a quote. Lately, things have been especially heated between the twins, and not just Charlie, but his associates too. Tyler and Cameron had started to view Voorhees and Ira as people who are being paid like full-time employees, but only working part-time, building their own projects on the side, one of which was a Bitcoin gambling site. This is absolute insanity. The twins are putting up capital into this company, and on company time and company energy and company resources, we have employees, leaders within the top of the organization that are not focused on this rocket ship that's taking off, but are actually divided in their efforts and energy, investing into another startup, a Bitcoin gambling site, on company time and company dollars. Lost your mind, man. These people are crazy. Lucky it wasn't me. Lucky it wasn't me. All right, let me read another quote. At this point, it was the twins' money that had kept the doors open and the lights on. Charlie had to understand, BitInstant wasn't his personal piggy bank. It wasn't a bankroll of his journey of self-discovery. Tyler and Cameron had a lot to be angry about. BitInstant had burned through a lot of the twins' money, and in a very short time, and Charlie kept running around without a care, almost delusional. So BitInstant is approaching insolvency because Charlie was not watching his costs. Sloppy, undisciplined, mismanaging, enjoying the celebrity of a successful company, but neglecting the hard work and the discipline that it takes to maintain it. This man refused to be frugal and disciplined and consistent. Listen to this quote from Sam Walton, because this is just wisdom on frugality. Sam Walton says, he's the founder of Walmart. He says, "Our money was made by controlling expenses. You can make a lot of different mistakes and still recover if you run an efficient operation, or you can be brilliant and still go out of business if you are too inefficient." Vitalik Buterin gamified staying at cheap hotels. By the way, I did an episode on him, episode 3 of the Pantheons podcast, and he got competitive with himself about frugality. One time on a business trip, and his executive assistant actually had him stay in a place so cheap that the sanitary conditions led to him becoming sick. His executive assistant literally had to draw a limit and stop him from going that cheap. Andrew Carnegie, right? He's a steel magnate in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s. He was known to be more interested in what it cost to produce the goods of a business that he was maybe potentially investing in, rather than knowing about the revenues or the profits. The greatest steel magnate of his life was amongst the greatest entrepreneurs of that time, was more interested in the cost of goods rather than profit, right? When you and I are analyzing business, I think for me, like the first thing I'm going to look at is profit. No, not this guy. The first thing he's looking at is cost. All of the Pantheons were crazy about costs. So in 2014, BitInstant is on its last leg. They need a $500,000 bridge loan, and Charlie goes to the twins and begs for it, pleads for it, asks for it, even though he has shown nothing but incompetency once he started tasting success. And this is the beginning of the end, because the twins extend that bridge loan to the company. This situation describes exactly what Charlie Munger once said. He said, "Smart men go broke 3 ways: liquor, ladies, and leverage." So those 3 things can definitely be applied to Charlie Shrem. But that first part about smart men go down with these 3 things, what do you think happens to dumb men like Charlie, right? Charlie hits all 3 of those. So OboPay, that licensing company that helped them become compliant for the first time, pulls out. Let me give you the quote. "Charlie had done the only thing he could, shuttering BitInstant's doors. He had kept the twins in the dark until the last moment, and that's what they couldn't forgive. He had posted some nonsense online that it was just a temporary suspension of business to revamp and refit, that BitInstant would soon be better than ever before. But Cameron knew that Charlie's message to his customers was as untrue as his previous email had been. BitInstant was not coming back. To actually revamp, he would need new money transmission licenses, he would need a new banking partner, and most of all, he would need cash. Lots of it, because he had burned through everything the twins had given him, including the $500,000 emergency bridge loan that had still never been paid back by the company. The twins demanded their $500,000 back, and Charlie is completely unable to pay it, and BitInstant finally collapses under the weight of incompetence and foolish decision-making. So I'm actually going to go backwards in the story. There was this guy who went by the alias BTC King, who was buying up tons and tons of Bitcoin through BitInstant, finding loopholes around the transaction limits that BitInstant had put in place. And it was like a steady stream. It almost seemed like the dude had infinite cash. He just kept buying and buying and buying and cycling through Bitcoin through the website, which is nice, right? Helps the website make money, but very suspicious and strange behavior. He was the only one on the entire platform. Again, 35% of the entire world's Bitcoin transactions was running through the site. He was the only one doing this type of thing. And because this obviously looks like money laundering, Charlie at first decides to ban him, but then he reverses the decision. Here's a quote. I'm going to reference a person named Gareth who helped to build BitInstant's website. So Gareth, usually silent on matters like this, had grown concerned from Wales. He lived in Wales. From Wales, believing that such volumes from the reseller meant only one thing. BTC King was buying Bitcoin to sell to people who were shopping on places like Silk Road. Silk Road was a nefarious, there's a lot of arguments inside of the crypto community of whether or not, Silk Road is morally a good thing or a bad thing, but I'll do another episode on Silk Road one day. But on Silk Road, you could buy evil. Really, you really could buy, I would call it evil, drugs. You could buy services like a hitman. I mean, it gets very dark what you could have bought on Silk Road using Bitcoin. And it seems like this guy, BTC King, was buying Bitcoin to resell to people that were using Silk Road. So this website, by the way, Silk Road eventually gets taken down by the FBI. Really fascinating story. I can't wait to do an episode on it one day. Let me give you the rest of the quote here. Charlie emailed Gareth. He has not broken any laws, and Silk Road itself is not illegal. We also don't have any rules against resellers. We make good profits from him. But Charlie, so many of his transactions smell like fraud or money laundering. Charlie reached down and shot off a single answer to Gareth. Cool. And then he closed his laptop and tried to forget his problems, if only for a night. This negligence is the straw that broke the camel's back, the thing that put Charlie in jail. Here's the quote. Charlie was at the airport with his girlfriend, Courtney. Waiting in line, he saw a man in a uniform was approaching from behind Courtney, and he realized it wasn't a customs uniform. It was something else, more like a suit, but with a badge attached to it, to the lapel, and handcuffs hanging from his belt. Charlie turned back toward the customs window and saw another uniform approaching from the other side. And before he could register what was going on, he was boxed in. The man in front of him stepped past Courtney and looked him square in the eyes. Are you Charlie Shrem? We need to ask you a few questions. And suddenly, they had him by the arm and were leading him out of the line. Now, Charlie, do you know anyone by the name of Bobby Falea? Online, he called himself something like BTC King. And in that moment, suddenly he knew. It's Silk Road. Silk Road had been taken down 4 months prior to this moment, but that didn't mean the government was finished with it. They would be going after all the leads, all the intelligence that the bust had produced for years to come. And now it appeared Charlie was suddenly somehow one of those leads. So Charlie gets arrested and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering, and 1 count of failure to file a suspicious activity report. If I could sum up Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss's lesson learned from this particular experience, it is this. Do not invest in idiots. They will always ruin a good business. So this is a seminal moment in the life of Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss. Tyler and Cameron says, forget it. We're going to do this ourselves. So in 2015, they launched their own crypto exchange called Gemini. After BitInstant's downfall, after Silk Road's downfall, after the Mt. Gox downfall, a very famous story as well. I'll do an episode on Mt. Gox as well. After all these organizations and websites and the Bitcoin ecosystem is just, it's an earthquake. It's shaking. It's being turned upside down by the government. The twins step into the fire and launch Gemini. Gemini grows to become one of the most profitable and prominent and compliant, legally compliant, US-based exchanges. One of the top exchanges on planet Earth, still around today, growing faster than ever before and doing incredible. And now we get to the final part of Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss's journey. Here's a quote. You see it, Tyler said, almost offhand, like it was the most meaningless question in the world. See what? Cameron asked. Look at your computer. Cameron shifted in his seat and then faced the screen on his desk. His eyes moved to the ever-present ticker at the bottom, and then he paused. If he hadn't known better, he might have thought it was a mistake, a zero where something else should have been, a glitch of pixels on the screen. Bitcoin had just hit $10,000 a coin. Cameron knew there were many reasons that had led to this incredible rise. Regulation and around cryptocurrencies had gotten clearer, and most people didn't believe that governments around the world were going to outlaw the new form of money. More and better entrepreneurs had moved into the space, built more infrastructure, made it easy to buy, sell, and store Bitcoin. There was a greater level of education. People started to see that Silk Road was not Bitcoin, that there was so much more to the technology. And in fact, it was akin to how the internet had started off as a niche, hard-to-use thing, and then had just proliferated over time as infrastructure and user-friendly applications emerged. And as more entrepreneurs flooded into the space. And so Bitcoin had risen and risen and risen. and was now at $10,000 per coin. The calculation was not hard for Cameron to do in his head. As of that moment, the entire market cap of Bitcoin had reached over $200 billion. Beginning in 2011, they had acquired 1% of that market. And since they started buying the virtual currency, they had not sold a single Bitcoin. Cameron looked at his brother and then smiled. I'm 6'5", 220 pounds, and have $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. Oh, and there's two of us. His brother was ready with a line of his own. $1 million is not cool. You know what's cool? $1 billion in Bitcoin. Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss had officially become the world's first known Bitcoin billionaires. And that is Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss and their crazy journey. These guys were part of two separate industries, two multi-billion-dollar ideas. Unbelievable for that to have happened in one lifetime, and they're just getting started. Just a reminder, Pantheons podcast is on basically every social media platform. It is at Pantheons. There's an S at the end of the word Pantheons. Pod. So at Pantheons Pod, P-O-D. All of my stuff is Pantheons with an S. If you found this episode to be very valuable, share this episode with a friend who you would think would benefit from it. If you would, it would really help me out a lot. Right? I spend money, resources, time. We have a team doing this. And if you believe in the mission of what we're doing here at Pantheons, what I'm trying to do here, then please share it. Follow, subscribe on whatever platform. And really, you're going to help your friends. Whenever you're sharing Pantheons, we're trying to give you the highest value per minute, right? Hopefully, you're extracting value for yourself. You're doing the same thing by passing it on to a friend. So please spread the word. Thank you so much for listening and watching from wherever you are on this planet. I am sincerely grateful for you. I cannot wait to get your feedback, to hear back from you, and to hear how this added value to your work. I can't wait to see your DMs. I can't wait to get your messages. I can't wait to get some of your phone calls. And until next time, I will see you on social media.